Hello, everyone, and welcome to Salem Happenings, a show digging into the issues that you're all talking about around the city. We're joined by former city art planner Deborah Greel, Salem's Gazette reporter Will Dowd, and retired Salem State academic administrator Gwen Rosemond. Subbing in for Salem State professor Rebecca Haynes, we also have the all-powerful John Andrews from the Creative Collective. I'm Dustin Luca with the Salem News, and as always, we're joined behind the scenes by SATV producer Alan Hanscom. Normally, we dive into our first topic of the show at this point, but we're going to hit pause for a moment just to reflect on something. This show for us started to begin the new year 12 months ago, and the show we have now, the space we occupy, and the body of work we've created at the end of the year isn't even close to what we imagined in January. And that's something that every person in Salem, we think, can say about just the sheer unpredictability of the year. Life didn't have a script to tell us what happens next. It didn't have a volume dial or a mute button, and there's no DVR to pause or skip over the painful parts. This year's been a roller coaster, and while on this ride, we've all lost a lot along the way. Some of us lost jobs, others friends and colleagues. A lot of people have lost life partners, siblings, parents, fragments of their soul that are never going to come back. And there's one thing that unites all of us in all this, that it's really, really easy for us to recognize the things that went wrong this year. But it's harder to find the good things we found along the way, and it can be done. We've all done a lot of growing. We've been solving problems that we couldn't have possibly imagined. And we're doing it at a rate that would have seemed heroic to our past selves in 2019. So across the city, we saw the same resilience in the drive to survive in everybody. Every business went through some sort of transformation in this. Artists were put to work in absolutely beautiful ways. And I think we've all gained a valuable skill in not taking things for granted. I mean, Salem's got an outside dining scene now. Who didn't see that coming? So our first remote episode in the spring focused very heavily on the good work that's going on in the city, and you're going to hear echoes of that in conversation in today's episode, I'm sure. But let's not forget where we are to end 2020 and how much power we hold to dust ourselves off in 2021. After all, the Spanish flu of 1918 ushered in the Roaring '20s. And I didn't know if anybody else wanted to add anything to that.
Well said, Dustin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed.
So on that note, the theme of this episode is taking a look back at the year and some of the biggest things that we've gained. Easily mobilization, we think, was the biggest thing that we've gained. Arts are absolutely bumping right now. Businesses have been innovators, and even city government has found a way to move things forward with virtually nobody at City Hall. So who wants to kick this one off? I mean, this has been a very successful year given all the problems.
I mean,
Well, I'll start off.
Go ahead, Gwen. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it really is striking to me how Salem has dealt with this, and it becomes really noticeable. And not to pan anyone, but when one looks at one's surrounding communities, nearby communities, other areas in the state, when one looks across the country, to have really taken charge insofar as possible of what this pandemic has meant to all of us. And it's been a horrible scene, and we all know that. And yet there have been so many times when I have simply said, I'm so glad I live in Salem. I'm so glad Salem has the leadership to manage and to oversee this, what otherwise would be a horrible, more horrible experience. So I'm really glad that Salem is where I landed, and that Salem has the foresight and the ability to work with, again, what otherwise would be even more of a horrendous disaster than it is.
Yeah, from very, 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 very early on, with the advent of the Economic Development Task Force and just conversations that started so much earlier. Other than Merrimack Valley, I didn't really hear anyone talking as a group as soon as we had. And Merrimack Valley had such a strong connection because of the Columbia gas crisis. So like they had a plan in place where we didn't. But we popped right into action, and having all the right people in the right room to figure out how we could, the Economic Development Task Force was only one task force in an overarching COVID task force thing. And it was just super impressive. And I felt like we did our best to try to stay ahead of everything, which when the game changes pretty much daily, it's really hard to keep ahead of it. but the flexibility, the malleability of not only the economic task force, but the small businesses in general, just really, there was this constant underlying theme of like, yeah, this is pretty bad, but there's hope, and there's people making progress, and there's people pivoting in successful ways and changing in successful ways. And, even in which we were all, completely taken aback by, even in the middle of the summer, I mean, there's lines at stores, there's reservations at restaurants, weekends being sold out. So, I'm hoping that when we come out of the other side of this, from what I saw through that whole stretch, all of that work, the back and forth, the working, the arguing, the fighting, the mask awareness, all of it, we come out of this with roughly the same amount of businesses that we started with. And, I'm hearing a lot of people taking pauses in the winter, but I'm not hearing a lot of people closing in the winter. And that's a testament to, I think, what has gotten us to this point.
I think let's do a slightly deeper dive into that, though. I mean, I think part of the reason that this was successful is when we want to talk about leadership, but we have John Anders and the creative team in our city. I'm not sure where else the city had such a connection to somebody who was already on the ground, who had already built up these kinds of opportunities, had already built up a connection with particularly the creative economy folks, the artists, the designers, the restaurants. So I think we were a bit of ahead of the curve, I think, John, because of your team and being able to work with the mayor and having those relationships was huge.
I mean, it's for me, it's just that intersection of, having an awareness of and having communication one-on-one with these business owners. I mean, they're all humans, they're all people, and they're all part of our communities. And they, a lot of times, just want to be heard, and they want people to understand their plights and their struggles. One of the things that's really complicated about Salem is we breed individuality. And we love that these businesses are unique. We love that these businesses have their own models and their own plans. Well, trying to represent a bunch of people that do things very differently is not very easy. So you got to show up. You still got to be boots on the ground. You got to go into their stores. You got to ask them in their place, like, what's happening? How are you doing? How is it going? What are you running into? I mean, I heard things that I never would have imagined as challenges this year just by listening. And then you address, when we started the outdoor dining project, there was a lot of talk about closing streets down and activating parks. And that's not what the businesses wanted. So as soon as we started asking the questions, we started getting the responses. And one of the things that I felt, because I worked in some other communities on the outdoor dining as well, one of the things that I think we did way better than anyone else is we asked. And so the buy-in from the small businesses and the restaurants, because we were asking the questions, not telling them what they wanted, was a lot. It was just so much stronger. And the world that I typically represent with the creative side of things, to Deb's point, we all think outside the box about everything, almost to a fault. So pivoting and changing and moving and shaking and reinventing businesses and coming up with new strategies, like that's kind of what we do anyways. So like to see that community be able to really show off how being flexible and creative and unique can be. I mean, those that figured out ways to change their business every 2-3 weeks, every month, every 6 weeks, those are the ones that are like, yeah, I'm just going to take a break, but I'll be back in the spring and we're going to be just fine.
There's a lot of fans. So if you weren't a person who was, an artist bringing that to the conversation, you are someone like me that could say, I'm going to support my favorite shops downtown. I'm going to support the restaurants that I would either be at. I'm going to make sure, and your stay local shopping was great. I entered, I'd say 90%, at least 90% of my gifts were purchased downtown, because we have built up this community of support. So we all had a piece to play. We could all do something, like as Gwen was saying, we could all support something. You just did it in like this big, wonderful way that you could go out and take selfies and stay safe. But
well, part of why, part of why I haven't, you keep driving me to that, but part of the reason that I'm not saying art specifically is because these are still all small businesses. The mural behind me in my backdrop, Meg is a surface designer, and she's a small business, and she lives right in the buildings behind her mural, and she pays taxes, and she goes to the shanty, and I'm just the changing of the narrative. One of the things that I'm hoping comes out of all of this is when we hit the other side of the pandemic, the creative community, these small businesses that you might not think of as small businesses, just because she doesn't have a storefront doesn't mean that she's not part of the community and not a small business. Like, can we come out of this and be like, oh, there's hundreds and thousands of small businesses all around us that we're not even engaging with? And to watch all of the local businesses that I know of embrace that, the ones that do have storefronts that can now offer all of their services online, all of the ones that have partnered with these local vendors and makers that had no opportunities to do outdoor markets, they're bringing their products indoors and selling them that way. Moody Interiors worked with 2 or 3 different October vendors that couldn't vend, and they were like over the moon happy with the sales because they were and so it's kind of win-win. But again, it's just that, like, it's changing that dialogue of like, yes, they're arts based, but they're small businesses and they really made a difference. What would we be like through this crisis if it wasn't for public art, mask making, online shopping, where would we be with all that if we didn't have books, if we didn't have Netflix, if we didn't have cinema, if we didn't have online performances, where would we all be with all of this? It would be in a really much worse place. And that community has been hit so hard as far as they're not getting paid. There's absolutely no work for performers right now. And so, I posted something earlier today, and I hope people remember this. When we come out of this in the summer and the fall, remember that those people cannot be paid in exposure. Those people come to the table with a budget, come to the table with some money, because they've given you all of this for free. But they also need to pay their rent and their taxes and be part of the economy as well.
Yeah. And just one of the reasons why I'm glad that we're able to include you actually in this episode was because, a lot of the work you've done hasn't just been in Salem. It's also been in Beverly. It's been in Peabody. It's been all over the North Shore. And you can kind of speak to how well Salem is doing because you're seeing a lot less vacancy in Salem as you are in other places. Like the North Shore Mall, I know right now is freaking out because they don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I'm actually heading up there after this to talk to them because of that exact reason. The stores are changing, the big boxes are changing, the whole vibe is changing. And, it's this flip flop of, we were a mall-based society that went into a Main Street-based society, then back into a mall-based society, and now we're heading back into the Main Street-based society again. And there's something in the middle there. There's something in the middle there, and there's something that we can work on. And we started to do that last year, and I'm hoping that we get back to it. And it was, establishing the fact that the mall isn't the bad guy. We want to support our small locals, but can you imagine removing the tax revenues out of all of those stores and in the real estate? Like, we don't want to lose that. And they have open spaces available. They have outdoor spaces. They have giant parking lots. They have food courts. They have spaces that we can do stuff in. But like COVID, I don't even know what's going to come out of the other side of it. As far as the malls go, I'm hoping to have some more discussions because, the other thing is the creative community, what do they need? They need space. What do malls have? Space. So how do we work a better deal there and find some sort of happy balance point? I'm not one of those people that are like, the mall's the bad guy. Don't ever go to a big box. Well, you know what? I got to go to Best Buy for stuff. I just do. There's just certain things that I'm not going to get downtown. And I'd rather go somewhere where I know the employees than go to Amazon. So there's that thing too. That tax base helps us.
Yeah. And before we move on to the next topic, I just to kind of circle this all up. One of the things that we can all talk about is the reason why things are going so well in Salem is because you have a board of health that listens to all of the different, people, and you have doctors that are speaking, and you could disagree with some of the changes that are happening. We have a really high profile meeting on Wednesday that could actually cause the shutdown of every restaurant in the city. But, at the same time, I don't think there's anybody at the end of the year who's like, the board of health or the city destroyed this or damaged that. It seems like the board of health has done an amazing amount of work this year.
I think that they really have, and it has not, as you allude to, it has not necessarily been popular work. In fact, it's been unpopular, I think, for learning. And it is sort of inconceivable to me how one can have a board of health that is doing the job that it's hired or elected or chosen to do in this context of this pandemic, and people object to that. And I understand all the things that play into that in terms of the economy and people's livelihoods. But I hate this expression, in these unprecedented times, the need to defer to those who know what they're doing, and that would be the Board of Health. They don't make these decisions lightly.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going through for our top most read stories of the year at the Salem Gazette, and all of them were like, the economic task force, the mask wearing inside businesses, outside dining, the governor coming to Salem to praise us for all of our first of its kind of work that we've been doing, like the mask wearing and making people go outside and eat and whatnot. And I just think that they've been very innovative, as Dustin said in the beginning. And I just wanted to ask, John, do you know if we're going to be keeping outside dining? Has there been discussions about what we're going to keep?
So let me
2021.
Let me go with that.
Because even when COVID goes away.
One thing to just say really quick to back up Gwen's point. If you think about the job that you all do, if you had to quadruple your job with the same amount of staff and the same amount of money, how would that feel? Because that's basically what Board of Health just did. Board of Health was thrown on the front line of every single major decision in the city. I mean, that is talk about unprecedented. That's unprecedented. And people don't really think it's that way. They're like, it's affecting my business. Why are they doing this to us? Why? They're not. They're trying to keep people alive. They keep track of the hospitals. They know what the hospital occupancies are. They talk to, North Shore Medical Center daily. There's no one on the Board of Health wants to ruin your business. I get it. It's hard. I had to cancel every single major event that we did for the whole year. I had to say no to outdoor markets when they were doing outdoor markets in Marblehead and doing outdoor events right around us. And that's okay, because you know what? I have to trust that the Board of Health knows what they're talking about. I absolutely have to. That is their job. That is what they do. To layer that into Will's question, yes, outdoor dining will return. We are starting to have that discussion about what that could look like now, how expansive is it going to go, but also understand that every single department that gets affected by that has not had their budgets increased. Think about all of the Jersey barriers that DPW had to move and store. Think about all of the outdoor decks that they had to disassemble to put away. And so all of this stuff, it's a bigger discussion, but there was an extremely positive whole thing that happened around outdoor dining. It will happen again. At what level and what extreme? We're working on it now. I'm working with the city again to work on a spring 2021 rollout. I've already met with DPW. I've already met with Parks and Rec, parking. I've already met with the city solicitor. We're talking about licensing. We're talking about, there's a whole licensing issue. If the ABCC pushes back to the way it was before the pandemic, it's a 12 to 16 week process to get an extension of premise to be able to do outdoor dining. The summer's over at that point. So there's a state level thing, there's federal stuff, there's local, not as easy as just throwing a couple of picnic benches outside. Everybody has to work together. When we were doing outdoor dining, we had weekly meetings with planning, licensing, city solicitor, DPW, parking. Like, it was great. The art was great. The Jersey barriers were great, but the process behind it, people really need to respect how many players had to come together to support these small businesses. It looked like it just showed up overnight. I can guarantee you it did not just show up overnight. And then on the flip side, to have DPW freaking out trying to get Jersey barriers out of the way before the first snow hit. Like, there's a whole, I will give Ray Joden and DPW more credit. They absolutely crushed it. And again, another department of the city that quadrupled their work. They also put up all the mask signs. They also put up the lawn signs at all the parks.
Yep.
They also, like, it's just insane. But it worked really well because everybody came together as much as possible.
You know, a lot of all that stuff that you just mentioned was duplicate, like others, like, you know, I cover more than just Salem. I cover Swampscott, I cover Marblehead at times, and I cover, you know, just other communities. And just to see all of the other ones, like, follow the lead of Salem, like, it just literally, it wasn't, I mean, we really were entrepreneurial in the way we responded to the COVID situation and keeping our businesses open.
But you know what, if you, I am on the licensing board, so you're right, John, there has to be ABCC, you know, but hopefully the way, first of all, I know that we're all in favor of doing that on the board itself. But one of the things that I think you're talking about is there wasn't a no. When you have everyone in the group, if you have, you know, the planning board, I'm not saying it was easy. I'm saying, but if a mayor says, yeah, this is too much, or a town manager says, no, this is too much, or you have the Board of Health maybe run by somebody else that didn't do as effective of a job. Everybody not only did their job, but everybody was ready to say yes, as opposed to being that one. Hey, let's face it, you know, I've worked in city government. I know that one or two people can be the catalyst that says, yeah, it's too much. We're not going to do this. That didn't happen here. You know, everybody was, what can we do? That is really good leadership from all of you.
And those are the best types of people.
What?
Those are the best types of people, in my opinion, the yes people.
Yeah, the yes people.
The yes people. Yeah, the people who make it happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Make it happen.
It's
We'll
yes,
figure out a way.
Get this done. Kind of
Speaking of making it happen, so obviously another major event that took place this year is Salem actually returning to the PBD Essex Museum. And this is something that we've actually been hearing about for a while, just with the change in leadership over there, what was happening with the Phillips Library for a while. And this year, we had the first Witch Trials exhibit since the merger in 1992, a new Salem Stories installation with rotating pieces of Salem culture hailing it frequently, and even more. Salem Happenings actually had an opportunity to go in and check out the Trials exhibit. We're going to show you a few minutes of that here.
It's part of our general turn towards the community. Brian started about a year and a half ago in July of 2019. I arrived about a month before he did. And overall, we're interested in exploring the local history, Salem history, and our permanent collections, which we think have been a little bit neglected over the last several decades. So that's when it started.
And it happened shortly after COVID. I think you and I, because
That's right.
We went on a tour together, and you said that it kind of came about after that. I'm just sort of, what was the inspiration for that behind, you know, just I mean, you guys spent sort of the COVID months putting this together, you would say, right?
Right, and it was a challenging set of circumstances. We had limited access to our collections, and we all had to adjust to a different way of working as well. So all of our exhibition meetings were virtual. There wasn't an opportunity to kind of sit around the table and throw ideas at each other in the same way that it has
It was like
done
getting
in
it
the
over
past,
and
right?
brainstorming together and things like that.
Right,
So,
and so we had very limited time actually in the collection center, kind of looking at documents and choosing what we wanted to do. And Dean really had the idea to organize the exhibition around the objects that we had, and then therefore the people that had owned or were associated with those objects. And that became a real effective way to organize the exhibition. It made the document selection a little bit easier, and it enabled us to tell the stories of the real people who were
Yeah, so I think the documents that are on display are from the original Salem witch trials documents that haven't been displayed in what, some 30 years?
30 years. In 1992, there was an exhibition called Days of Judgment here, and that was the last time when any of this material was on view.
And
so,
why, before we go inside, why can't they be on display so much? What could happen with them? Just, yeah.
the documents in particular are very fragile. You know, they're over 300 years old, right? And they're very light sensitive. So they really can only be safely on view for 6 months to a year, and after that, we need to put them away. Once ink or print fades, you can't get it back. There's no way to conserve that or bring it back. So we have to be very, very careful about how much exposure these documents.
The full feature will be on our Facebook page if you want to dig deeper. So now I'll send it back to you folks. What stood out most to you, whether it be about the interview we did, about, you know, just the year that PBD Essex had, or even just the recent news of the change in leadership? Just what are everybody's thoughts of PBD Essex and the year that it had?
Well, Will and I were at that interview, which was, first of all, I think we gave them 2 days notice, Will, to have them come over. So the accessibility was there. And so that's...
They're yes people. They're yes
somebody
people.
Just came in and my dog's barking, so he's being removed. Yeah. And I think in terms of change of leadership, I think, more will be revealed. But I think the change in leadership wasn't because the museum decided to do everything on Salem, and I'll leave it at that. So I think it's the right direction. I think it's the right direction to incorporate that. Did you notice the new windows that they, the designed windows in some of the buildings they own? So they use on the pedestrian mall, just slightly down, they've opened up a shop, and a small PBD Essex Museum shop. They also have some information. They have some models and clothes about what's going on in the museum. But also, if you notice, and I think some of these folks, John, have been some at your markets, some of the things in the windows were all local Salem artisans, which was really nice to see that in their window, highlighting some of their craft. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that the dialogue and discussions with the museum are more about how to make community engagement work both ways. I have been talking to the education department and the marketing department both about how do we do more with community engagement. And community engagement doesn't necessarily mean just go to the museum. And the fact that we're starting to have those discussions, what the museum does in the museum is fantastic. Nobody's ever questioned that. What's inside the four walls of the museum is amazing. They have world-class programming. They have world-class exhibits. They're really good at what they do inside the museum. Being a true community partner works both ways. And I feel like it's nice that those discussions are starting to happen. And things like the outdoor activations like that are definitely helpful because you're not in the museum. There's an accessibility to that. And the fact that they are incorporating some local artisans and makers is even better.
Yeah.
Their relationship with Georgia, from Georgia Made This, little Georgia, that has been a 5-6 year relationship. I mean, we brought her into a Penn PM a long time ago. She did an outdoor stand with kid entrepreneurs at the museum a few years ago. Like, this is all part of an amazing relationship that's long-term. So it's really nice to see them starting to spread out a little bit beyond their own property. They own so much. It's great. It's great. Like, Ropes Mansion. How many people love just going to Ropes? It's a whole thing,
one of the things that we should talk about is, Trevor Smith, who is a curator there, he had an exhibit that never has been seen. It was an interactive exhibit, I think, with some music and things like that. That was never seen, ever. It was never put out because of COVID. And then my favorite was Where the Questions Live, which was this brilliant exhibit in the Nature Culture Center that was not only just for children, but for adults as well. And, I took my grandchildren there. They were 15. I visited many, many times, completely shut down. I hope that doesn't go away. But they lost a lot in terms of because an exhibit can take 2 to 3 years
Minimum.
to plan. And then here you go, because it's either going to go on to somewhere else, and but that was rough. That was rough to have that loss.
Well, it's also kind of amazing that they put the witch trials. Bringing it back to the Witch Trials Museum here, because I think Gwen had something to say too. But I just wanted to say was that, the fact that they put this together in such a short period, like you said, 2 to 3 years for an exhibition. This was together in like 9 months, 9 months. I think that's how long, right? Well, under 9 months anyway, within the past year. But it's got like some amazing things in it, from, an execution warrant to examination documents, and some original documents that deal with where the sort of inception of it all happened, which was in the Paris home. And so it was kind of neat to go through that. Did you have something to say?
I just think it's so important, real quickly, that the people of Salem feel like it is our museum. It is something that we share. And not that that some people think, it's here, but, it's not part of Salem anymore. And so this movement to resume, to get people to feel like it's our museum again is so refreshing.
Yeah.
And the current exhibit on the Witchcraft, the Witch Trials, is part of restoring that feeling to the people who live here.
And even just on top of that, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you've got a whole nother exhibit in there as well, Salem Stories, which takes the 26 letters of the alphabet and ties all the 26 different stories of Salem's past that aren't getting as much attention. I don't know. I started covering Salem in 2014, and immediately I was hearing people saying, there's nothing here on Monopoly. There's nothing here on, and now there is. How more Salem can you possibly get than actually having a Monopoly game at Peabody Essex Museum?
And I think the discussions are also heading in the right direction, that hopefully you see more of that type of local creative community engagement.
Yeah, and we're starting to get, I'm a Salem resident, and I get now Connections, which is like, I think it's called PIM Connection, which is just for residents, and it's like a newsletter just for residents too. And I always enjoy just going over that and seeing what is inside it. And I think it's a monthly one too. So that's another sort of point to show that they are trying to be more local.
Oh yeah.
Also, if people have not seen the fashion exhibit yet, put up by Petra Slinkard, one of the great things right now about the limited numbers is that you really get to have time in the gallery to look at every single thing and to read every single thing. And it's just a joy to be able to do that. So if you haven't seen that one, go in and see that one too. It's just a really fantastic exhibit about women's fashions that I think anybody would really like.
Yeah. And on that note, I know we were just talking a couple seconds ago on community involvement and things like that. There was also a lot of action on the social justice front this year. For a few months this year, we could reliably expect protests and demonstrations to march through the city every single week. It seemed for a while every Friday. And it seemed like every topic that had some level of protest that could go with it. But we didn't see this play out any louder than through the Black Lives Matter movement. And to end the year, the city's Race Equity Task Force has launched an equity survey. If you haven't had the time yet, it runs until January 8th. It's anonymous. It's available in Spanish and in English. So make sure you do it. And on that note, table set. Who wants to speak?
I've taken this.
Oh, all right.
Go ahead.
There you go.
Great. It takes about 5 minutes. Go ahead, Ben. You probably have to.
No, I was, we cannot underestimate, no one should underestimate the awakening that the summer brought to folks who, I don't want to say were not aware, but who were not, thought it was something outside of, was not related to them. And the Black Lives Matter movement, and it is a movement, the demonstrations, the calling these events and tragedies to people's attention, for many of us, many of us felt like, we've been telling you this for generations. We've been saying this is how it is for 400 years. And finally, more people began to pay attention. And what's really critical in that paying attention is that it's not treated as a trend. We talked a few months ago about the reading groups and the book clubs that grew out of the movement, that it has to go beyond that. It has to, this whole sense of this commitment to race equity has to go beyond only a book club and has to become part of one's experience and part of one's values. So I think, the summer is over, it's cold, and most of the demonstrations have stepped back into the warmth, but the issue is still there. And the race equity survey that we referred to is a part of addressing that issue for Salem. What really is the experience of people in Salem in terms of race equity? And it's important that folks fill that survey out.
It's like asking, it's like going to the small businesses and asking.
Yep.
And the Racial Equity Justice Committee is asking. And from there, your work will be formed. So, yeah.
To
I was thinking the same thing, Deb. I was thinking the same thing. I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Ditto what you said. Yes.
And to Gwen's point, I mean, just because it's winter, just because it's quiet, it's a great time to pick up a book. It's a great time to do some research. It's a great time, again, if we want to come out of this better, then we have to do the work. And, a lot of people are going to have a lot of time on their hands this winter. Let's continue to do the work and not stop. Obviously it's not the headlines every day. Obviously it's people aren't talking about it as much. It doesn't mean that it's gone away. And there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that want us to go back to the way things were. I think that that's absolute crap, for lack of a better term. I think we can come out of this in a better place. To Dustin's point earlier in the conversation about the Spanish flu and the pandemic, we learned lessons, not all of them, but we learned a lot. The Spanish flu pandemic brought out the age of theaters. Things came out of it. We are going to do a disservice to all of the pain, suffering, and loss if we don't come out of this in a better place.
Yeah, I agree.
And not to kind of turn kind of a month into an example, because I know that whenever we're talking about Black Lives Movement or anything like that, whenever you start talking about February as being Black History Month, there's a lot of people that kind of roll their eyes about that, and they're kind of like, okay, is that the only month of the year you're going to talk about this? But you are going to have a lot of book lists that are going to be coming out in a few weeks that are going to say, hey, read this book, read Fred Douglass, read August Wilson. And especially because you've got August Wilson's Century Cycles all being turned into movies now. So Gwen's class.
Anybody needs a book list, find me. I got list. And
lastly, though it still isn't really even over yet here at the end of December, there was a lot of news about elections this year. In fact, 3 were held in Salem. You may not remember that. We had a presidential primary in March, then a state primary in September, and the actual presidential election in November, 2 of which were held under the pandemic. What did everybody think about that, just as we're wrapping up today?
I thought it was pretty amazing, just how much they, before this session, we had a planning session and we kept saying how well everyone pivoting. And even John said it earlier. And just everything. I mean, I think it's amazing. I mean, we had 14 days of early voting, in-person early voting, and a lot of changes that happened because of COVID. And I think it just proved that if you expand the access to the ballot box, you're going to have record turnout, just like we did this year. And I hope that a lot of that stuff stays
or expands. We also saw that
or
actually runs elections. So we saw it on our city level, we see it on a state level, and we saw it on the national level. So that's why I think our democracy held, because of who runs our elections, and it's not the federal government. So I agree. I think states are looking at maybe doing same day registration. I'll be very interested to see what happens in Georgia. So the catalyst of some people like a Stacey Abrams and what happened nationally
Mhm.
was, you know, when somebody says one person can't make a difference or doesn't make a difference, man, yeah, she did.
All those many years ago when I was a kid in school, and we were required in order to graduate to take a civics course. And as I recall, it was a course where you learned not so much politics, but how government worked. And you learned about the Constitution, and you learned about the branches of government and who did what and how it worked. And I think over time, I have a sense over time that in most places, those courses may have gone by the wayside. And I would like if people could think about in their school systems, in their communities, revisiting, bringing back civics courses, not from a political point of view, not from a party point of view, but from a how government works, how the United States government works. Because one thing I have become aware of these past few months is so many people who simply do not know how the United States government works. And I think in losing that education, losing that course, we've lost an understanding of the way things are supposed to be in a democracy. So that's sort of my plug. Let's bring back civics courses, non-political civics courses. How does the United States government work constitutionally? How does it work?
One of the things, actually, she made it to the New York Times today. I don't know if anybody else did, but my sort of go-to person that I read every single morning, and I know Gwen does too, is Dr. Heather Richardson. Does anybody read her? She is a historian. She lives actually up here in Maine. She's written a number of books, and she teaches at Boston College. Gwen, is it? Or Boston University?
It's Boston College. I'm not sure, but yeah.
So she started Letters to Americans this year, and I read her faithfully every day. As I said, she finally made it to the New York Times. I didn't necessarily love that article because I don't think he was very respectful to her. I don't think he even read one of her letters. But in terms of sort of talking about civics, in terms of history, in terms of where we were, where we are, she has kept a lot of us sane through the past, probably since March, I think, is when she started her letters.
Well, I think that's
Yeah.
all the time.
And I say one more, one thing,
Yep,
Dustin.
go for
I just wanted to say, I mean, the other thing as far as elections and leadership, like, and this can backfire if looked at in certain ways, but remember what leadership was like through this. You know, remember what you saw, who really had your back, who didn't. Obviously, everybody stumbled. This is, again, unprecedented. I have seen this test the best. I have seen this crush the best. I have seen people that I thought were extremely strong leaders fall apart because it's an ungodly amount of pressure and weight and stress to try to stay ahead of something that changes so constantly. So I would say as we come out of this, just remember what your leadership did, what your elected officials did. You know, were they about the community? Were they about coming together? Were they collaboration, or were they pulling things apart? You know, we don't need to pull things apart. We can pull things apart when we get back better. We really need to kind of everybody needs to kind of come together and work on these critically important elements. We want better diversity and equity. We want small businesses to survive. I want the creative community to get paid what they should get paid. I want the world to be a better place. But I also remember what I saw through this crisis and who I'll support and who I won't. So
it is an election year in Salem too.
Yep.
I see what you're getting
every single
already starting.
Yeah,
So,
that's a really good point, John. Thanks for making that.
well, that's all the time that we have for today. For Alan, Deb, Gwen, John, Rebecca, and Will, we want to thank you very heavily for joining us on this journey in 2020. We're at the end of the year, but we've already got a growing list of topics to dive into in January, and we can't wait to discuss them with you the next time things are happening in Salem.